You good to start, Tiffany?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, awesome, everyone. Hello, my name is Katie Kiner, and I'm a postdoctoral resident at Texas State Counseling Center. And this is my colleague.
Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Tiffany Digby. I am currently a doctoral intern here at the Counseling Center. So it's nice to be with everyone today.
Yeah, thank y'all for joining us. Today's webinar is going to be about the manipulation tactic of gaslighting. And this webinar will provide participants with information on recognizing signs of gaslighting, as well as strategies to challenge the behavior. If y'all have any questions throughout the presentation about the Counseling Center, go ahead and put that in the chat, and our awesome graduate assistant Eli will answer those for you. If you have any questions about the content of the presentation, go ahead and ask those in the question and answer, and we'll get to those at the end. Okay. So today, we'll be discussing what gaslighting is, the history of the gaslighting term, how gaslighting works, as well as the cycle of gaslighting. We'll also talk about the traits of a gaslighter, warning signs of gaslighting, even common phrases used by gaslighters. And importantly, we'll also talk about strategies to challenge gaslighting and specific ways to respond to a gaslighter, as well as the effect of gaslighting on mental health and what gaslighting can look like in different contexts and settings. Finally, at the end, we'll provide resources if you're needing further support after this webinar. Before I even define what gaslighting is, try reflecting and remembering if you have ever had an interaction with someone where you found yourself asking, wait, what? Or where you found yourself asking, am I really just overreacting? If you have, then you may have experienced gaslighting, which is a psychological manipulation and abuse tactic used to undermine a person's or group of people's perceptions, judgments, emotions, reactions, and reality. The goal of gaslighting is to gain power over someone and make someone doubt themselves, and it can involve denying, dismissing, refusing to acknowledge, misdirecting, contradicting, or even lying to delegitimize a person's beliefs, experiences, and memories. It can range from telling someone what they're experiencing is not true, to even involving staging events or situations in order to disorient another person from reality, which often influences one to feel confused and question their memory, reality, and even their sanity at times. So we wanted to tell y'all a little bit about the history of gaslighting. And so according to the articles that Tiffany and I read, the term gaslighting originated from the 1938 play called Gaslight, otherwise known as Angel Street, by Patrick Hamilton, which was also made into a film in 1944. The play and movie story focused on a husband psychologically manipulating his wife and attempting to convince her and others she was not grounded in reality by using gaslighting strategies to make her question her reality. In one pivotal scene, the husband causes the gas lights in the house to flicker by turning them on in the attic of the house. Yet when his wife asks him why the gas lights are flickering, he insists that it's not really happening and that it's all in her mind, which then led her to doubt her perceptions. So from this scene, the term gaslighting was born. However, even though that happened in the 30s, 40s, it wasn't until the 1960s that gaslighting really began to gather meaning as a term to describe manipulating someone's perception of what is real. It's unclear when exactly the term emerged into the world of psychology and sociology, but it's now frequently employed in couples counseling and self-help books to describe a specific type of toxic relationship. And it's really important that gaslighting is understood as rooted in social inequalities and carried out in relationships and dynamics involving power differentials, where one is more powerful than the other or others involved. And the term has also been used in clinical settings, research, and even in political conversations.
So now that Katie has set a really good foundation, kind of talking about what gaslighting is and just setting that groundwork for the history of gaslighting, I'd like to briefly talk about how gaslighting works in these next couple of slides. So one, for sure, the very common and the most specific way is by lying. So the gaslighter is going to completely manipulate your understanding of things by setting a lie. So they're going to tell a completely different narrative that contradicts what you remember to be true. And in doing that, that automatically discredits like your own understanding. And so they will make specific points to discredit what you're saying. So that way you begin to question yourself and really rely on them for what they're saying is true. So, deflecting blame or countering. So, this tactic involves like a gaslighter questioning your memory of the events, even though you have remembered them correctly and they remember them correctly. They're going to completely, like I said, lie, and they're going to discredit the truth of what you actually know really happened. Trivializing, this refers to a gaslighter making someone's concerns or feelings seem unimportant or irrational. So they're going to dismiss and minimize your presentation of like your concerns about how they made you feel or your reactions or whatever thoughts you have about the situation. The next one, shifting blame or diverting. So, this technique occurs when a gaslighter changes the subject or focuses on the credibility of what someone is saying rather than the content. So, this would look like you're in the middle of a conversation and they'll say something else which is going to divert or shift the conversation to something else. So, they're manipulating the conversation almost in their favor. And when that plays out over time, you will stand back and feel kind of confused. Like you're going to say, I know we started on this point, and now we've talked of almost in circles, or you're completely talking about something different. And so you begin to feel really confused. So that's not only diverting the conversation, but they're going to start to shift the blame in that process. The next one, denying wrongdoing or withholding. So they're just going to, like I said, they're going to do anything possible to make you feel like you're the one responsible for your own reactions, even though you know very well that what's taking place is they're manipulating the situation. And I'll even step back. At this point, you may not really know what they're doing, but you will begin to feel like maybe I'm doing something wrong. And that's just because they're shifting that blame and they're denying the wrongdoing. So the next bullet point, it says using compassion as a weapon. So this refers to how a gaslighter will manipulate a person into feeling sorry for them. So it's a tactic in which they're capable of shifting the blame or responsibility of their own actions onto you. And that leaves you feeling kind of sympathetic towards them. So you're going to stand back and say, oh, I really do understand their perspective. I'm understanding what they're saying. I must be wrong and they must be right. And then this last one, rewriting history. So this is them telling you a different story of the situation that unfolded. And it's usually a story that is from their perspective and definitely benefits them. Katie, if we can go to the next slide. So let's see. So here we have the cycle of gaslighting. So right at the top, we're going to go from top and then kind of just go around the circle from there. So right and then down. So the cycle of gaslighting starts with a lie. They might say something like, you remember it wrong. And now that an alternative perception has been presented to you, like they begin to question your reality, right? Now you're questioning your own reality and wondering what's happening. You might say something like, they might say something to you like, is that how you remember it? And so you're standing there thinking, hey, I just told you what happened. And their rebuttal to you is that how you remember it? And so now you're starting to question your own understanding of what's happening. So at this point, you start to feel pretty confused and you will move to this next little circle. And so at this point, you begin to think something is wrong with you. And I mean, why wouldn't you? They're making you question your memory of the situation and their impact in that moment. So, moving along, now you begin to believe the reality of events. You are now at a point where you no longer are trusting yourself. And unfortunately, what happens next is you begin to rely on their memory more and more. So, as the cycle continues, you begin to discredit your own perceptions of what's true. You begin to question your own reality. And we'll talk about this a little further in the slides up ahead, but it really starts to affect like your perception of yourself and your autonomy in a way. So on this next slide, here we have the traits of a gaslighter. So since we've now discussed what gaslighting is, the history of gaslighting, and how the cycle works, let's just spend some time talking about like the traits of a gaslighter. So although there are traits on here that are pretty common for most gaslighters, I would say that this is not going to be an all-encompassing, a list that includes everything, but these are general traits. So these are the most common traits of a gaslighter. So for starters, a gaslighter is going to tell frequent lies and exaggerations. And so for this, they will say things to make them seem more important than they really are. You may be able to recognize this person as like the show off, right? So the person who has a lot to say about nothing almost. And in their lies, they're going to exaggerate the truth. And what makes this hard sometimes is that the lies that they actually tell may be grounded in some truth. So if they say something like, I went on this vacation, they may have really gone on a vacation, but did they do all the things that they said they did, right? Did they meet that celebrity or whatever? So it's kind of hard to separate what's happening in that lie or in that exaggeration, because some of that story is going to be grounded in some truth. So the next one, they rarely will admit faults and are highly aggressive when they're criticized. So when they make a mistake, they will place the blame and responsibility on someone else. And we've talked about that. They also tend to be very defensive when they're offered feedback or perhaps when you offer your opinion to them. So they obviously have a hard time being perceived as anything less than like perfect or powerful. This next one, they'll portray like a false image. So they're going to project that out there, which kind of goes with the very first bullet point. The next thing is, let me see, I'm trying to read this one from here. So they will break rules and violate your boundaries. So this one is going to look like they're not going to acknowledge your boundaries whatsoever, and they're going to intentionally push the limits, right? So it's almost like an act of control. If you have a boundary that says something like, I don't want to talk about this situation again, I understand my perception of it, I know it's true. If you were able to do that, they will find different ways to reel you back into that conversation again and again. So they're going to break your rules and like violate your respect or your requests, I'm sorry, for boundaries. The next one, they engage in emotional invalidation and coercion. I have a horrible time saying that word, so bear with me. So when you express to them like how they made you feel, they're going to invalidate your emotions by either ignoring that you're feeling hurt. They may also refuse to use words or labels like sad, hurt, truth. They're going to basically try to remove any ways that you have to articulate how they make you feel. So that might even look like saying to use certain language, like you should be more practical versus emotional. Again, it's them trying to take control, not only of the situation, but as to how you react to things and how you naturally, rightfully feel. So, coercion, I think, is likely the most manipulative behavior of a gaslighter. So, this includes things like, on extreme cases, this could be something like monitoring somebody's activities, like looking over like their cell phone and emails. It can also look like controlling somebody's finances. That's more so in a personal relationship, using insults and threats to scare a person, or manipulating someone to do something that perhaps you don't want to do. That last bullet point, like manipulation, of course, this is huge. We've talked about aspects of manipulation in each of these bullet points above. So they will use their power and control over you. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make you do what they want. So this may be overt or covert. And so I think like a good overt example could be something like them saying, if you do this, then I will have to, and it'll be followed by a threat, right? A covert example would be, you know, I really understand you better when you leave your emotions out of things. So they're not only manipulating your memory of things, but the important part of this too, like the second later, they're also like manipulating and controlling how you naturally react to this behavior, to this conduct. Okay. And I think we're ready for the next slide.
Okay. So some major warning signs you may be or have experienced gaslighting include you question yourself constantly. That's a pretty big sign. Or you wonder, am I too sensitive or emotional? You feel easily confused by situations. You can struggle making decisions because of this confusion. It can also involve you apologizing frequently when it's not even appropriate, or even thinking you do everything incorrectly or wrong. You could also just feel like you don't understand why you feel uncomfortable in a relationship or a dynamic. So you start lying to avoid being gaslighted, and you think you're not good enough because you've lost your confidence and maybe even a sense of who you are anymore because of the gaslighting. And a big one is that you notice yourself withholding information from your family, your friends, your supports, because you may feel like something's wrong, but you're not sure how to describe it or go about it safely. So sometimes it feels like, well, I don't even know how to talk about this with someone that I trust. Some major warning signs in the person gaslighting you can include they lie to you, like Tiffany's talked about already. They shame you. They deny your experiences or your perceptions, even if you have evidence. They withhold or discount information. They can present inaccurate information. Their actions and words are not congruent, so they're not lining up. They're not matching up, and they dismiss your reactions, feelings, or experiences. And these are all things Tiffany's mentioned in the past few slides. A really important part are some like objective common phrases that gaslighters use. And some of these can be, you're too sensitive, emotional, you need to be more logical. Or you sound crazy. You're just paranoid. I was just joking. You're making that up. You're overreacting. You're imagining things. That never happened, or I never said that. You're not remembering correctly, or even you're so ungrateful and nobody will believe you. So the first step in challenging gaslighting is to learn and be educated in what gaslighting even is and the warning signs of it, like Tiffany and I are talking about today. Also, naming what's happening can be a really strong strategy, whether to yourself, others, or the gaslighter, if it's safe to do so. And that's not always going to be safe to do that. Reality checking and record keeping is really important to increase awareness and insight into what's happening. So you can do this by keeping a detailed record of the gaslighter's behaviors, including dates, times, words used, and the context of the events. And if you read your documentation a few days later, you're likely to realize the behavior was inappropriate if you're not able to connect to that in the moment of the situation, because maybe you were in freeze mode when that was happening. Also, noticing when you're feeling confused, anxious, and uncomfortable in a relationship or a system can help increase awareness of being gaslighted. Listen to yourself, listen to your instincts. It's really important to trust your judgments because they're telling you something is feeling wrong, even if everyone else around you is saying that nothing's wrong. Mm-hmm. Also, talking to others about what you're experiencing is crucial. A lot of times it's much easier for other people in our lives to question and understand what we're experiencing when being gaslighted. Sometimes it's hard for us to connect to that or understand that's happening. And so talking to other people helps with reality checking to have another person's perspective, which is sometimes key in understanding what you've even been experiencing. In addition, using self-compassion, relaxation, and mindfulness strategies can be helpful also to ground you in the here and now, to maybe help you have that clear mind as well. And a big one is creating distance between yourself and the gaslighter, if possible, by keeping those interactions simple and short, even anticipating that the gaslighting behavior could happen if you've noticed that's become a pattern. So just again, having that awareness and insight and being a little prepared for that, even though you shouldn't have to be doing this. But if you find yourself in that situation, these can be helpful. If it's safe and possible to do so, setting a boundary with the gaslighter is very helpful. But we recognize that's not always safe and possible to do. It's really just asking yourself if it is. And other strategies involve not allowing the gaslighter to think you believe what they want you to believe. That can be a way to take some control of that situation as well. And realizing that the gaslighting you're experiencing is not your fault because it reflects much more on the gaslighters themselves than on you. That is really important to remember, even if that feels hard to do when you're being gaslighted. And finally, it's really important to understand that not every gaslighter even knows that they're engaging in gaslighting, because gaslighting is a learned behavior. So some of these strategies may help increase the gaslighter's awareness into their own actions and the impact they have on others. And that could be a game changer as well in some situations.
And so now, like, what I'd like to kind of talk about is just like specific ways to respond to a gaslighter. So we'll kind of start with the gray rock method, which is right at the bottom. And I'm noticing there's a typo that should say used to help when interacting with manipulative people like a gaslighter. So basically, you want to make sure that you are brief when you're responding to them. So using like really quick responses like yes, no, I don't know, mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do is just not interact with them. Like they need you to respond and to feed into this in order for them to continue to kind of play this control game with you. The other thing you can do is to keep busy during your interaction. So while they're talking to you, if you want to stay on your phone, like I'm texting somebody, just kind of divert your engagement, your full engagement away from them during that conversation or interaction. And be as boring and uninteresting or non-responsive as possible. So if they're going to tell like that exaggerated story, that exaggerated lie, just don't feed into it. Don't say something like, oh wow, that's like incredible. Like you just tell them like, oh okay, and just go about your day. And be factual, but also impersonal. So you find ways to do this in a way that's authentic to you. So I would say it's probably harder for me to be more impersonal because I'm a very personable person. And so it feels a little unnatural for me to kind of be cold in this regard. But the best thing to do is just stick to the facts and don't share any more information about like how you felt like doing something, etc. You're just going to try and stay to the facts in whatever conversation they're trying to have with you. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, almost like we're playing into their control of emotions. But once the gaslighting has already begun, you don't want to put yourself in a position where they're going to continue to manipulate or make this worse. So once you know this is happening, the best thing for you to do is to be really short, to the point, and pretty impersonal at this point. So if we go back to the top, like we're looking at general statements. So these are just general things you can say in response to what a gaslighter might say to you. So you could easily end the conversation by saying, we remember things differently, and leave it at that. You can say something like, I'm not going to engage with you if you continue to speak to me in this way. So if they're being aggressive or if they're in any context that's making you uncomfortable, I think that's probably like a go-to phrase you could utilize. And again, find ways to make this authentic to your language and your way of speaking and being. The next one, you could say something like, I understand what you're saying, but that is not my experience. That's very much what the first one, like we remember things differently. You can say, I'm going to leave this conversation. That would be if this gaslighter is completely violating your boundaries and they're not being respectful. You can just like say that and just walk away. And again, very similar to the other ones, it's something along the lines like, I know my truth and I'm not going to defend it to you. And I just feel like those are probably really helpful. So, Katie, if you'll switch slides for me. So now we're looking at gaslighting and mental health. So From here, I'd like to begin talking about how gaslighting affects one's mental health. This can happen in various ways, and I think it's important to recognize and name how serious and toxic gaslighting behavior is. In this context, for like in this next section of our presentation, I'm going to discuss specific ways that gaslighting affects one's mental health, how gaslighting affects your sense of self and autonomy, and I'm going to spend some time helping you distinguish the difference between negative self talk and self gaslighting. If we can go to the next slide. So on this first bullet point, we have like, oh, well, first of all, like our title slide, gaslighting and mental health, right? So this is where we are. So right there at the top, we're talking about trauma. So gaslighting can result in emotional trauma. For example, this can be in the form of emotional abuse and psychological abuse. So emotional abuse is any type of abuse that involves the continual emotional mistreatment of an individual. It's sometimes referred to as psychological abuse, and so sometimes those are used interchangeably. But emotional abuse can involve deliberately trying to scare, maybe humiliate, isolate, or ignore you or whoever this is happening to, or the gaslighting, I guess. Psychological abuse, on the other hand, involves like the regular and deliberate, probably like a range of words or non-physical actions used to manipulate, to hurt, to weaken, to frighten a person, to just mentally and emotionally like break them down in a way. So the purpose can also be like the purpose of like this psychological abuse through gaslighting. The intent is to distort, and we've talked about this, but it is to distort your memory, to cause you to feel confused, and to really influence your thoughts and your actions to align with their understanding of reality. So the next things that I'd really like to kind of talk about are just list these. So another aspect of this is like a decreased sense of self-worth, self-confidence, and self-esteem. And of course, like we can see why that's going to happen. If we're constantly in a position where somebody is manipulating your reality, telling you how to feel, how to express your emotions, when you can express your emotions, they're setting so many parameters around for you to just be and react that it makes sense why your sense of self-worth is going to decrease, your confidence is going to decrease, your self-esteem is going to decrease, you're not going to be able to almost feel as empowered as you were before. You're going to start to feel probably pretty anxious. Like I would imagine like being in that position constantly when you're questioning your own reality, you don't know what's real. What am I feeling? Am I feeling right? Is this normal? Like that's going to cause you to feel pretty anxious. On top of that, you could feel probably pretty depressed. Like I imagine again, just being in that situation, feeling alone, probably feeling isolated if the gaslighter is spreading this knowledge, their perspective to other people, you're kind of outcasted, right? And so you're left to kind of feel like I need to adjust who I am to be what they're perceiving or what they feel you should be. And of course, like the social isolation and withdrawal, I just mentioned that. The difficulty concentrating, the constant state of being confused, that again ties in with like the anxiety and the depression. Difficulty making decisions. Like, how are you going to be confident to make a decision just in regular life when a gaslighter has the ability to make you question your own reality, your own perception of things? So, naturally, it's going to be hard for you to make even the smallest decisions. And emotional breakdowns. You are going to feel pretty defeated, sadly, and they thrive on that. And that's what makes this really hard. If we go to the next slide. So, how gaslighting affects your sense of self specifically? So, you will begin to lose your voice, right? You are going to, if they're successful, you will learn to just go with what they say. You're not going to express yourself because how are you to know how to do that, anyways, when anything you say or do is questioned or invalidated? You begin to question your perception and you grow to doubt it. We've talked about that. You begin to feel powerless. How can you take control over a situation that somebody is already in control of? You forget who you are, right? Their reality becomes truth. Their perception of you becomes truth. You no longer know how to stand confidently in who you are and how you understand things. You question your reality and truth. We've talked about that. You doubt the validity of your own emotions, for sure. We've talked about that. They're defining exactly how you're supposed to react, and they're setting the parameters around that. You doubt your memories because their perception becomes truth. And their distortions, again, become how you see yourself. And in the end, the worst part of this is you learn to self gaslight. And I'd like to spend just some time kind of talking about that, which is right on our next slide. So, this is a big thing. I found this the most powerful and interesting in all of the information I found while researching for this presentation. So, the big question is, are you experiencing negative self talk? Or is this a form of self gaslighting that is developed as a result of having interactions with the gaslighter? So, gaslighting is generally going to come from a statement like, you're just imagining things, right? That's what they've told you. And so you begin now to say, I don't have a grip on reality, right? So now you're self gaslighting even outside of the conversations that you may be having with this gaslighter. And a way to kind of counter that is to have positive affirmations. So I would say to anybody here, if you find that this is happening and you can identify the self gaslighting statements that you may say as a result of having interactions with a gaslighter, I want you to also come up with a list of positive affirmations to counter that. So, like I said, in that first one, I don't have a grip on reality. You can counter that with a positive affirmation like, what I am feeling is real, is truth, is valid, etc. That next one, right under gaslighting, so that second one, you are just too sensitive. That's something a gaslighter would say. Then you might start to say over time, I must be overly emotional or too sensitive of a person. And so, a positive affirmation to counter that is, sensitivity is not a weakness and my emotions are valid. We go down to the next one. The gaslighter will say, you made me do or say that to you. So, again, they're blaming you for their mistreatment and their bad behavior. And so you begin to say stuff like, something about me brings out the worst in people. And so to counter that, or a positive affirmation for that, is, another person's behavior is not my fault. They're responsible for their own behavior. And on the last one, they might say something like this. This is probably more so, or definitely more so in interpersonal relationships, or even like relationships with family members, because it can happen in that context. But if you loved me, then you wouldn't do that. So the self gaslighting statement turns into, I need to be better in this relationship. And then a positive affirmation to counter that is, manipulation is not love and I deserve better. So I think one of the hardest parts is learning how to distinguish between like the impact that the gaslighter has like on your mental health, on your self-perception, and essentially how you begin to talk to yourself. So once you can recognize that you are being gaslit, if you notice that you are self-gaslighting yourself, again, I would encourage you to create like just a small list of some of those self-gaslighting statements you say, and just positive affirmations that counter that, and put that into like daily use, so that way you can kind of break this cycle for yourself. Next slide. So here, gaslighting in different contexts. So on this last part of our presentation, we would like to spend some time talking about how gaslighting exists in different contexts. So in these next slides, I'm going to discuss like gaslighting and how it presents itself in intimate relationships, in institutions or systems, because I think we tend to think of gaslighting perhaps only happening in intimate relationships or relationships with family, etc. That's not the case. It doesn't happen in institutions and systems. And then finally, I want to talk about how gaslighting is even used to confuse or to manipulate somebody based on their identities. So something that's called racial gaslighting. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
So before we get into the different settings, we just want to kind of prep for that. So unfortunately, there are multiple sources and settings in which the tactic of gaslighting is used. Gaslighting in society, institutions, and interpersonal relationships often develops or builds on an existing power dynamic. While it's most common in romantic settings, gaslighting can happen in any kind of relationship where where one person is more important to the other, and therefore the other person doesn't want a chance upsetting or losing that other person, such as a boss, a friend, a sibling, or a parent. Gaslighting happens in relationships where there is an unequal power dynamic, and the target has had to give the gaslighter power and often their respect as well. So, the different kind of sources and settings, abusive partners may use gaslighting by denying that they have ever been emotionally or physically abusive when they have. Abusive partners may also oscillate between ignoring and then attending to their partner, which can influence the other partner's perception of their worth and can also lead the other partner to second guess their choices or their reality, like we've talked a lot about today so far. Gaslighting can occur in parent child or other family relationships as well, and in which one or both family members lie to each other and may even make the other question their perceptions. Of course, peers and bullies may use gaslighting as well. And a work setting can also involve gaslighting, given the inherent power dynamics involved. Some examples of that could include a gaslighter mislabeling a worker's reactions as too emotional, or excluding, isolating, or repeatedly questioning a worker to make them question themselves or decrease their confidence, or discrediting a worker's ideas and then later presenting them as their own, or even criticizing workers in front of others in order to shame them.
And so, what I would like to spend like just a little bit of time talking now, of course, is like identity and gaslighting. So, gaslighting efforts are further embedded in gendered and obviously racialized social organizations of identity. So, what does that mean? That we're looking at gender identity, sexual orientation, cultural identity, religious identity, ethnic identities, etc. So the way gaslighting efforts or the way gaslighting can occur in this context of identity is like criticizing how a person expresses themselves in order to divert attention away from their message. So in other words, it's kind of like almost like, and it's awful, but like discrediting somebody's own lived experience by saying that that is not the norm or that is not the right way to do things. And so while you may be completely and rightfully affirming and validated in your own identities and empowered in that, a gaslighter is going to try and criticize that in various ways in order to move away from your message. They might also trivialize or downplay racist incidents. So that wasn't racist. Again, you're too sensitive. That's not what I meant. It was just a joke, etc. Denying that documented events, took place, such as the Holocaust. It might be like a more extreme case, but that is definitely a good example of that. The next thing is like, how can one experience gaslighting based on their identity? And although I've kind of set the foundation for that, I'd like to break it down just a little bit further. So, using cultural ideas or norms to invalidate your identity. So, that might look like saying something like, that's not how you were raised. If you cared about your family, you wouldn't, XYZ. Using religion to invalidate someone's identity. So this might be like threats of doom based on religious context to make you feel like you should be ashamed to be who you are, or perhaps labeling your identity as a sin and manipulating you to believe that's true, which is disgusting. Um, Dismissing your identity. So saying like you're not blank enough. Like maybe if you're, for me, I'll speak for me, like being like biracial as an Afro Latina, things that I've experienced a lot was like, I'm not Black enough, I'm not Latina enough, and just the blending of that. So it's just dismissing your identity. Or saying things like it's just a phase. The damaging effects of this, of course, is it creates feelings of shame and guilt. It completely makes you feel not empowered. You are probably feeling powerless, dismissed. It's intended, and that's the point, right? It's intended to make traditionally marginalized individuals perceive themselves as less than, and that is significantly harmful. On this next slide, so when we're looking at this from the perspective of intimate partner violence, like how is gaslighting a form of IPV? That's just an acronym. And of course, Katie did a beautiful job setting the foundation for me to talk about this. But basically, gaslighting is a form of emotional and psychological abuse, which I've talked about. Like they are going to make you question your perception of the abuse. So whether that is physical abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, they are going to do whatever they can to make you think that you are responsible for them being physically violent towards you or verbally abusive towards you. They're not going to apologize when you express that you're hurt, right? And why is that possible? Because they've already controlled that you shouldn't have been hurt. They've taken that away from your language. You're not hurt. You're not sad. You're not emotional. So why would they need to apologize for hurting your feelings when technically that no longer exists? Your emotions don't exist. Your reasons for feeling the way the way that you do, don't exist. So why would they need to apologize? Again, that's part of the manipulation, of course. They try to alienate you from the people who care about you. So when you would have to rely on a third party to kind of help you stay grounded in reality and in your truth, they're going to alienate you from the people who care about you in order to prevent you from being able to stand solid in what you know is true and real. They're not going to let you talk during conflict, right? They have to have the last word. They have to have control over things. Again, it's all part of the manipulation of taking control of the conversation and that shift blaming that we were kind of talking about earlier. Again, of course, I just said it myself. So they blame you or the circumstances for their abuse. And then they make you feel guilty for using your voice. So if you are standing up for yourself, they're going to say something probably along the lines like, see, this is why I get upset. You see that you're making me do this. If you would just listen, or etc. Anything to kind of make you feel empowered and to take your voice. On this next slide, so kind of talking about gaslighting in the context of institutional systems. So gaslighting strategies that draw on one's identity, like I've said, are especially effective at keeping those who are being gaslit isolated and entrapped. So how can an institutional system gaslight you? So basically, to me, this kind of looks like things at work, perhaps, right? Or in an organization or something that you're a part of. But let's think about it in terms of systems. So one, they're going to discredit your experience of racism, oppression, of discrimination. Again, remember, this is talking about gaslighting in terms of like identity and like in systems, but it could happen with anything outside of outside of identity. It could even be about your work performance, your work ethic, your professionalism. It can be in any of those areas. But in terms of identity and race, it'll look like microaggressions or overt aggressions, like you're just maybe saying something like you're just being too sensitive. And again, that fits in any of these contexts, right? Even outside of identity. They might suggest that your reaction is imagined. Is that how you remembered it? Again, questioning your reality. They're going to questioning your perception of the gaslighter. So what this looks like is they're trying to make themselves look different, right, than how you know they are. So they're going to say something like, well, they're not racist during that comment that was hurtful, or they didn't mean to hurt your feelings when they said you didn't get your work turned in on time. They, again, like that next one, they didn't mean what they said. That's just how they are. That last one, like that's just how they are. It's like if you were to go to like your coworker and say, you know, I kind of feel like this person might be gaslighting. If you don't use that language, but you go to a colleague to say, I'm feeling this way in this interaction, you might be gaslit even by that third party who might say something like, that's just how they are, right? So now you're beginning to question, again, your own perception of things, and that just makes it even harder, right? So that when we're thinking about it in terms of systems, I feel like it's even more damaging because when it's just one person and one gaslighter, you have multiple people outside of that context to kind of gain some solid ground and reality perspective checking. When this happens in an institutional system and the majority of the system holds that idea, that is incredibly isolating because who will you go to get this like understanding of what's truth and what's real, and you're left to feel really isolated. So it can create a really toxic like work environment, school environment, whatever this system is. Undermining the severity of your action to anything. So, like I said, racism, oppression, discrimination, or your professionalism, your work ethic, if this is at work, they might come to you and say, like, once you make the complaint or you try to address this, you might get placed in the situation where they're telling you, why didn't you say something sooner? Right. So, again, undermining the severity of your reactions or your experience to them gaslighting you. And we have resources.
Okay, so finally, we wanted to provide resources if you want or need to reach out to anyone about your experiences of gaslighting or any other concerns you may be experiencing. Someone in the question and answers actually asked, what should I do if I now realize like I gaslight others or I'm a gaslightee? Talk to someone in counseling. The Texas State Counseling Center, we have the resources here. So that we have the website, we have the number. There's also on this slide, we provided the 24/7 crisis hotline number that you have access to. Just let them know you're a Texas State student. We also wanted to include Hayes Caldwell Women's Center, who serves all gender identities despite the name of the place. And that's in this area. And then there's Safe Alliance, which is located in Austin. We wanted to give those resources as well, and the National Domestic Violence Hotline number. So these may be resources if you want to take a picture of this slide. I think this, since it's being recorded, this will be posted on our website. So you can always come back to the webinar too if you want to look at some of these resources as well. And then here are our references that we used for this presentation. And we want to be able to give you some time for any questions, comments that you may have. Someone already did, I'm not sure if everyone can see this, but someone already asked, once you've noticed the gaslighter and got away from this person, how do you recover that confidence or start feeling yourself again? And that's a really great question. And Tiffany, you may have something else to say, but when I read that, I thought, really take a step back and look at your values, look at your strengths, look at your positive qualities, and use some of that self-compassion to try to connect with yourself again. I think self-care can be really helpful in this, and also talking to other people about this too, because maybe that can be helpful in gaining that confidence again.
For sure. So, I mean, I'm going to echo what Katie said. Like, I think one of the biggest things is going to be like gaining that confidence back. And I think a way to do that really is to reach out to the people you are closest to. So, whatever that support system looks like, they know you. They've known you the longest. So, if this is like a best friend or a really good colleague who you've worked with for a long time, they're going to know the reality of like who you are as a person genuinely and authentically. So having them to kind of reaffirm, validate you will help build your confidence. I think the other thing I think of in moving on beyond that is learning how to trust again, right? So that's going to be really holding on to like, what are these traits of a gaslighter? What are the things that a gaslighter says? And like having a somewhat knowledgeable foundation in that is going to help you to pick up those red flags. So if you meet somebody and you're noticing they do that, maybe that's just their way of being and they're not necessarily trying to manipulate you as a gaslighter. But if you notice it's happening continuously, then your red flags are going to be up and you're going to say, this is not a person I should engage with. So just again, extending off of what Katie said, just like being able to build your confidence by reaching out to support, and then just finding ways to like identify like those signs and traits so that way you can have your own radar for those red flags. And then picking up green flags. What is really good in a person that I want around me? How do they validate? How do they affirm? Like, are they open to emotions? Things like that.
Yeah, those are great. Awesome. Someone else also just asked, is a typical gaslighter rooted in control or fear? So that is a part of it, possibly. And like we talked about, we briefly touched on, a lot of that is learned behavior as well. They may have experienced gaslighting also, but some books that can be really helpful in understanding that, since we didn't really touch on why does someone gaslight. A big one is Gaslighting, Recognize Manipulative and Emotionally Abusive People by Dr. Stephanie Sarkis. That's also right here, an article we got from them as well. That's a really good one in even understanding that. Or another book is In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People as well by Dr. George Simon. So those are some books that can help you understand that as well as yourself in that situation. The control and fear, I would say that has a lot to do with it too. I don't know what you think, if you have
Yeah.
anything to add.
No, I'm just going to echo what you said 100%.
Cool.
Are most gaslighters in relationships that really seem to want it to work unaware? Are most gaslighters in relationships that really seem to want it to work unaware? I would say that is definitely a possibility. I wouldn't say that most gaslighters are going to be unaware of this. I think a typical gaslighter knows that this is what they're trying to do. It is about control. There's an aspect of abuse with this, right? Whether they're aware of it in that level, that this is abusive and harmful or hurtful or toxic, etc. But I would say that they're probably more aware than unaware because they understand the reality of what happened and they're actively engaging in lying and discrediting your truth. So they would have to be aware of what they're doing. Otherwise, why lie? Why try and have you understand things that aren't true? And why try to kind of get that control over like what is real over you? That's just my opinion there.
Yeah, completely agree, Tiffany. These are great questions.
Yeah, for real.
Does anyone have any other questions for us? Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more, but if you have any, oh wait, is there another? Is there a certain type of person vulnerable to gaslighting partners? I think that's really hard to discuss or say that it's like someone else's fault for being vulnerable to gaslighting. I think I want to say no, that's what I'll say here, but that's just something that definitely you can talk in counseling about this, about relationship patterns maybe that you've had, but that's what I'll say on that.
Right. And you will find articles that'll say like a person who's most vulnerable to gaslighting is X, Y, and Z. But again, I think that's unfair, right? Because then that's almost pathologizing you as a person because it'll say things that are like more emotionally aware, more sensitive, more kind. And I would hate to pathologize that. In a way to say like this is why like you're vulnerable to this, and it takes responsibility away from the gaslighter's behavior by saying I'm more vulnerable to this, and that's totally unfair to you. But you will find articles that'll say things like that.
I agree, Tiff. Is that fair? Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, thank you all for your wonderful questions. I guess we have time for one more.
When a partner micromanages the way you speak in everyday life, is that gaslighting related? I would definitely say so, right? Like if they are trying to control aspects of you, I think what I would want to do is understand more about that actually, like more about the context, like why are they trying to manage the way you speak? For one, this may not be like a gaslighting technique, but it's definitely manipulative, and it could be toxic, right? We don't want to ever feel like you're in a space with somebody who is trying to control, just how you speak, express yourself, emote, things like that. I think that's unfair. It's toxic, if anything else. Potentially toxic, if nothing else.
Yeah, completely agreed. If someone's trying to micromanage how you speak every day, that's saying that like how you're speaking is not good enough. And so I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I see the time, and thank y'all for being participants of our webinar. And you can always contact the Counseling Center if you have any more questions about this.
Perfect. Bye, you all. Thank you.
Bye.